Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. Last week was the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And if you're like me, you watch the news, and half the time you think that Russia is about to retreat, and the other half you're worried about the provinces that have been annexed in Ukraine. It is a difficult war to sort of decipher. There's also a media war sort of happening as well. When I say war, what I really mean is that it's very difficult to find anything critical of Ukraine. It's not difficult to find anything that's rightfully critical of Russia. But I've had a couple guests on lately that have sort of shaken the trees a little bit in that landscape. I had Seymour Hersh last week, who talked about the American alleged involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline bombing, and he got eviscerated online for that. And what I wanted to do after the year anniversary is have someone on to help us sort of explain more of the military side of what's happening in Ukraine. And he's a friend of the show, and we've had him on before, and he's an urban warfare expert, and his name is John Spencer. John, how are you, buddy?
I'm great, brother. Thanks for having me back.
No problem at all. Listen, I know that you're not really involved in politics of stuff, and I didn't plan on asking you this, but the Nord Stream pipeline stuff, do you have any opinion on that, on who did it? And if you did, are you allowed to talk about it?
So I have no insider information. I'm as public and private as you. I have opinions about it on just there is a common sense reasoning on who would do it and why they would do it, and that doesn't point to the West, in my opinion. I'm not saying there's an investigation that will point to the most likely culprit and how it was done, because it was an interesting operation for sure.
Yeah, you're so close to your chest, eh?
Hey.
It's good.
I've done this long enough to know when not to stick my foot in my mouth, and I've only done it a few times.
That's okay. No, I respect it. I understand. Alex Fezziak on the show, and he's the CEO. I'm not sure if you know who he is. He's the CEO of Heart of the World Ukraine chapter, I guess it is. He's also responsible for bringing equipment to the front lines. He imports strategic equipment like radios and drones and things like that, not like surveillance drones. And the interesting thing is he told me that the Ukrainian military had figured out how to outfit a surveillance drone so that it could drop a grenade as it's surveilling, which I think is really kind of interesting. And then I saw this headline: did Ukraine start a drone war in Russia? Does the defense ministry have a plan to protect our cities? A pro-Kremlin figure wrote on Telegram, a sign of growing unease. Is there a drone war happening in that war?
Absolutely.
And can you explain what it looks like?
Sure. So it looks as unique as the different types of guns people carry. There's so many drones being involved in the operation in Ukraine from the beginning. So even in the beginning, Ukraine had the TB2 Bayraktar, the Turkish drone that's like a tank killer that was really big in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. But as soon as this became a people's war as well, you had DJI drone, stuff that my kids play with from China, in using those for surveillance, for calling in artillery strikes. Some of these drones now they've outfitted with, they can drop 6 munitions, not just 1 grenade.
Wow.
Artillery rounds. They can drop mortar rounds on top of. I've seen them drop a mortar round into the hull of a tank that was open, like a very expensive Russian T-90 tank.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so that's just it's just so many. And Ukraine has outfitted drones with even like special engines. A few months ago, they sent drones into strategic bombing planes in Russia. Like these are like $1 billion planes, and they launched a drone that doesn't normally have the capability to do that. But Ukraine was the ingenuity of Stalin's army. I mean, it was it's a birth. It is known for military innovation and ingenuity. So they're taking different types of drones, whether it's a flying drone or a river sea drone, and doing things that nobody thought was possible. So that headline's about some very recent Ukrainian drones that have been sent into Russia proper, um, which is basically bringing the fight to Russian territory. There's a lot of caution in that, because a lot of the strikes that have happened in the past, whether that's in Sevastopol and Crimea, or other places where there's a lot of plausible deniability by Ukraine on, I don't know how that bridge blew up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I just read this recently. The military situation is becoming increasingly difficult around eastern Ukrainian town of Bakhmut. President Zelensky said on Monday, as many of Ukraine's battlefields turn to mud. In the Bakhmut sector, the situation is constantly becoming more difficult, Zelensky said in his nightly address. The enemy is constantly destroying everything that can be used to protect our positions for fortification and defense. Russia's defense ministry claimed its forces destroyed a Ukrainian ammunition depot near the town, the focal point of Russia's advances in eastern Ukraine, also shooting down 4 HIMARS missiles and 5 drones launched by Ukrainian forces. It feels like the main story at the beginning of the war was the heart and courage of the Ukrainian people, and now the story seems to be like everyone's still kind of trying to hold on land that Russia is continuously trying to annex. What kind of progress has really been ground by Ukraine in this war?
So it's tough, right? So Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe. The even the maps that we see, it's kind of like those comedy shows where the actual size of Africa compared to where it's shown on the map. Ukraine is huge. So what's the progress? So in the beginning, like 8 cities were under attack, and Ukraine defended all of them. Besides the fall of Kherson and Mariupol, in a couple other places. And then about 6 months ago, Ukraine pulled off like one of the biggest military victories in modern times with a surprise attack, retaking hundreds of kilometers of land that Russia had taken, secured. And Russia hasn't had a victory since 6 months ago. Like they haven't taken anything since they took the city of Severodonetsk 6 months ago. They've lost the city of Kherson, which was a strategic victory because, as you know, like you keep mentioning, Putin illegally annexed 4 areas of Ukraine that he didn't even control. He signed it into the Russian constitution, which was immediately voted on in the UN as illegal in accordance with the UN charter by like 130 countries. It was just crazy, not unanimously, but overwhelmingly, that it was illegal. And then a couple months later, he loses the capital of Kherson, which is not just a city, but it's one of the regions he annexed, and he lost that city. But war is complex. All the news right now is about this city of Bakhmut, right? So the city of about 70,000 people before the battle had happened. And unlike some of the previous in the beginning where there was an intermixing of civilians and the civilians were involved, in like Bakhmut, most of the civilians who wanted to get out got out. So it's 2 militaries clashing in urban terrain, which is what I do. Mm-hmm. But the actual city holds no value to either side. I mean, of course, it holds value to Ukraine because it's Ukrainian land. But like in the Battle of Stalingrad or other famous urban battles that we know about, they actually overcome actual military value, and it's about politics. It's about political reasoning. And President Zelensky visited Bakhmut, a few months ago, right before he visited the United States, and said, Bakhmut is the fight for Ukraine. He gave the Bakhmut flag to the House, the Congress when he visited. It's now taken on a political value, just like Stalingrad did for Stalin, because his name was on it, where both sides are fighting beyond reason for a piece of ground that has no advantage to hold to either side.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just thought of this now while you're talking about Zelensky. is it normal for presidents or leaders, world leaders during a time of war to have body doubles? Did you see this?
I did not see that. I, I mean, he's probably the most important person to protect, because just like I said about the Battle of Kiev, when I went back there in July, had the Russians just got into the city, they didn't have to take it, and they forced him to flee or kill him, we would not be having a war today.
Yeah, no, the one I'm talking about. Biden was over there, and they were walking up a staircase, and you could see another Zelensky on the bottom of the staircase. It was just like it made its way around, and then I'm not sure if it was deleted or not. I just found it interesting. I wasn't even knocking it. There were people that are like, there's people that are just like not pro Russia, but they don't want this war. They don't want American blood and treasure to be spent on this war, whatever it is. We're saying that the whole war is a scam because he has a body double, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure a body double is standard procedure for a lot of war.
I mean, look at the whole puffy faced Putin. I mean, like Putin has multiple, and Saddam Hussein had multiple. Like, I'm not saying that that's what was there, but it would be not uncommon.
Yeah. Okay. The almost certain guarantee that Ukraine will be a member of NATO eventually. Will that not? It seems like that's what I've been reading lately. Let's just say, let's just operate it as a hypothetical that they're on their way.
Yep.
Would that not be a recipe for perpetual war with Russia?
I don't think so. Just based on the history of the history of Russia in general, the history of the post-World War II world that was created, right, in all the multi-international organization. Russia was invited into NATO back then, and actually, I only remember the name because it rhymes with it's the Molotov. So the Molotov was the Russian foreign minister at the time. This narrative has been stated in the past that the reason Russia invaded Ukraine was because Ukraine might have joined NATO, and he couldn't have a NATO country on his border. Somebody said that NATO would never push closer east, no inch. Like that's just a mixing of speeches and positions. If that
wasn't that a Reagan, that was a Reagan negotiating point with Gorbachev, wasn't it?
It was never a stated. So yes, it's a combination of speeches, but it was never a stated. It is a narrative that Russia has had for a while that they're being threatened. What's being threatened is Russia's way of life, not the borders. It's the fact that Ukraine, as an independent, and after the 2014 revolution, when they ousted the Russian-backed president through an election, the threat to Russia is a vibrant Ukraine, non-Soviet, non-Russia-backed country thriving, which is what is happening. That was the threat to Russia. If Russia's threat is not having NATO on its border, it just lost that with Finland doubling its borders with a NATO country, and Finland will absolutely be a part of NATO. I hope Ukraine is a part of NATO, but that is years to come. You can't be engaged in an active conflict, and there's a whole bunch of other things that have to happen. So I think that's years down the road. I hope the process starts for sure.
What is the appetite in America right now for the financial and weapons being sent to Ukraine? I mean, it feels like, and this is a Canadian looking down on America, just because I'm up north, not because I'm looking down, but that the Republicans are sort of cemented in their mess about how this war is a proxy war and it's not necessary and all that kind of stuff, which I find interesting also because the Republicans used to feel like they were the party of the military. That's just what it always felt like. And is that changing? And then the second part of that question is whether or not the appetite in America for sending over money and weapons is waning.
So on the first part, that's pretty easy to answer. No, I think the Republicans, we still have bipartisan support, especially even now with the changeover in the House and the key leaders in like the House Armed Service Committee and things like that. The Republicans supporting Ukraine. There are some far right Republicans, which I'm sure you could name some of them, who have this as their political thing, right? Their thing is we're wasting money and we need to spend this money here, here, and here, blah blah blah, or there's corruption, or the CIA was involved in the revolution, all these things. I don't think none of that's true. I think from all the key leaders, the key Republican leaders, they actually want more action in Ukraine, not less, more weapons, not less. And the money thing is really always ironic because it's usually people parodying things like Tucker Carlson and people like that who just had this narrative that is actually not based in facts. Like the amount of money that the United States.
What? Tucker?
Yeah, right. The amount of money the United States has sent to Ukraine is like 1% of our annual defense budget. And a lot of the stuff that we have provided in Lend-Lease or whatever is actually us upgrading our own stuff. Like, hey, we'll give you this. And then Congress, we need to buy new stuff for the stuff we just gave. That's called the drawdown. We're actually, it's not junk, and I don't like people to say that, but we're actually giving Ukraine our inventory and then buying newer stuff for ourselves. So This is where the money is always funny, but just by sheer GDP and expenditure on defense, we're sending a fraction of what the U.S. spends on our own defense budget, and we're getting our bang for our buck. We've said for years that our two competitors are Russia and China, and Ukraine is destroying the Russian military, and we're paying pennies on the dollar to make that happen.
What other than the political blowback or the political afterthought of this taking place, what is essentially wrong with China trying to broker a peace deal?
Nothing wrong with that. If it's a I'm all for it if it's a real interest in negotiating rather than trying to freeze the lines now, which by the greater international community, this was an illegal war fought illegally. So there's this thing called just war and just war theory. One is there's a real reason for you invading or starting a war. And then two, there's you execute the war in accordance with all the laws. And Putin just doesn't have either. So yeah, China's negotiation plan is there's nothing there, but I'm not against anybody holding, a conference and bringing people to the table, hopefully, which leads to Russia backing up to the 1991 borders of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's another thing. It feels like the conventional wisdom is that Crimea is lost no matter what happens during this war. Would you tend to agree with that?
No, I mean, I think that's for the warring parties to decide. Most people, to include us, recognize that Russia illegally annexed Crimea. Mm-hmm. War is politics by other means. So does Ukraine militarily have the capability to retake Crimea? With 50 plus nations providing it with the weapons it needs, maybe. Is it the red line for Russia as a state that Crimea is Russia? Because they did a lot of basically moving out the Ukrainians, killing them, deporting them, and filling Crimea with Russians. So if the peace plan is like, let's have a internationally brokered election in Crimea, right? So that's one of the ideals that's out there, right? Because Russian elections are pretty much by a gun, like in Kherson. If some international party said, let's have an election, there would likely be more Russians in Crimea at this point than there are Ukrainians because of what Russia's done since it took it.
Right. Is there a educate me here for a second, because I don't know that, and I felt like I used to know that a proxy war, yeah. and now I feel like I don't. 50 nations supplying Ukraine with weapons. That doesn't make it a proxy war, does it?
Yeah, it does.
It does?
Yeah,
I thought a proxy war was when there was a third-party theater for two nations duking it out against each other. But this feels like an invading force in one country and then just friends of that invaded country helping them out. Isn't there sort of a subtle difference between those two things?
there are sort of differences what you just explained, but both of those are proxy wars where if one country is providing another with the tools it needs to fight its enemy. So just like, Charlie Wilson's war, Americans provided Mujahideen of Afghanistan weapons to fight the Soviets. There's really no difference here where Americans and 50 other nations are providing Ukraine the tools it needs to fight Russia, who is trying to upset the global international order to include U.S. interests in the region. That's a proxy war. I have no problem saying if there's a proxy war going on in Ukraine, but it's also with reason. There is good and evil. There is just war. There's plenty of wars and conflicts going on around the world right now that that aren't as impactful on the globe as the war in Ukraine is right now.
Yeah, it feels that way. It also feels really interesting to see certain journalists accuse the Ukrainian government of being like the big laundering operation on the planet now. When that has to do with weapons manufacturers, that has to do with aid and things like that. I ask you this almost every time you're on, and I don't mean it because I actually believe this, but I'm always very suspect when I see someone get treated as if they've never done anything wrong. And I know that war is often through the media as well as on the battlefield. But I've never seen someone like Zelensky before as a political figure just walk on water. you know? No, and I know he's doing a good job, I get it, but like there has to be something. And I think it's part of the reason why there's a segment of the population that probably should be pro-Ukrainian, but are probably more neutral is because they see it that too.
Yeah, so I mean, I understood what you said in the beginning of this show about, I'm sure people put me in a very pro-Ukrainian camp, and I am very pro-Ukrainian because I'm pro-human rights, pro, the right and wrong, evil and good, and I'm also an old soldier, so the things I've seen the Russian soldiers do are inhumane and have nothing to do with war, and it's just savagery. But I also laugh at the ideals of people saying Ukrainian government is corrupt. There's a resource curse. Look, the United States led the Afghanistan government for 20 years, and it was one of the most corrupt governments in the world by the corruption index, while we were there overseeing it. So to say that there's corruption in Ukraine is pretty laughable. And I'm not saying Zelensky does no wrong, but he has to be given credit for his, Churchill level leadership of this country, who had just come out of a revolution, had just established a government that they wanted, no ties with the East and wanted ties with the West and wanted to resolve corruption, which was rampant. And he's still firing people a lot when corruption is identified. So this idea that we don't have corrupt politicians is pretty funny. Like we're saints and we can point at there's human nature, but you got to give Zelensky credit. I'm not saying he does no wrong for the amazing leadership he has shown, to even personal injury to himself and his family, to stay in certain places or be in certain locations for sure. But I acknowledge that nobody, he's not the Pope.
No, well, he's not that bad. You're right. Can you tell I was raised Catholic?
Yeah, right.
What do you? We only have a few minutes left. What do you hope to see in the next, say, few months in order for this war to reach a tipping point? I'm not asking for a prediction, but based on where you see both sides situated right now and where the boots on the ground are, what do you hope to see in the next few months?
Yeah, so I'm actually going there very soon just to continue my research, and you can't continue to talk about these places, and I know you get at people like, okay, what's your expertise and how do you get that expertise? So I like to travel there to get a sense from even the nation, as this is a nation at war. And I think people forget that. They think they want to compare the Ukrainian military versus the Russian military. That's not the war that I see when I go there. I see the Ukrainian people against the Russian military. I see a war of survival versus a war of conquest and savagery. The predictions is, unfortunately, we have for the last, ever since the war started, incrementally arming Ukraine with the tools they need. Had we given them HIMARS and all these different fancy words for artillery and armored personnel carriers, had we just given that all to them 11 months ago, the situation would be a lot different. So over the coming months, they're going to get tanks. They're going to get the armored personnel carrier that I commanded in combat, the Bradley. They're going to get more air defense systems so that Russia can't try that tactic of terrorism that they were doing 2 months ago with just bombing every city, which are all war crimes. But they're going to get more air defense systems to take that tactic away, and then more of this war of attrition will continue, where they're Russian military and Ukrainian military are clashing. Hopefully, what I'm hoping over the next couple of months, though, they get some of these critical systems like the 300 plus tanks that will form a tank division, and there can be some greater movements. Because right now, we believe the Russian offensive has started. What they call Russian spring offensive, and actually, it's very underwhelming, even from Russian experts, that this is what we're seeing. Well, Ukraine will punch back next. It will go on their offensive with whatever capabilities they've rallied, and how fast the continued Western aid. It's not just West is not just the United States, but tanks from multiple European countries, and how they bring that together to where they punch Russia in the face in a couple places that are key in, like the Donbass, where they're fighting right now. I mean, it's not going to, this war is not decided over that city called Bakhmut. This war gets decided on who can maintain its alliances, right? This is the fear of China backing Russia with weapons, which would be a really bad idea for China, especially with some of the issues that China has, and China doesn't like to back losers. Ukraine maintaining this alliance will be a key part of going forward, and keeping those flows of weapons. I mean, professionals talk logistics and amateurs talk tactics. This war continues or doesn't based on who can keep it supplied. And Russia is turning to Iran for drones. That's pretty sad.
Yeah. John Spencer, I love having you on. You make me feel both educated and stupid at the same time, because I know nothing about any of this stuff, and I'm really happy that I have you in my network to come every couple months and to give me your updates. Please stay safe over there. When are you leaving?
I can't tell you exactly, James.
Oh, right. I forgot. Do you need a biographer? Because I'd love to go. Oh, no, wait, I'd be in a war zone. Never mind. I'll do it for me. John Spencer, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chase. Thanks, brother.
You have a good night. He's great. I don't remember how I found him. I think I just scrolling through Twitter, and this was like not quite a year ago, maybe 9-10 months ago when I first had him on. And I rely on John to sort of educate me, as I said, about all things Russia, Ukraine. So that was informative to have him on. We'll have him on again soon, and we'll see you next time on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.